In her sprawling Victorian dining room, 68-year-old Cassandra Hemingway was about to shatter 4 decades of family tradition. What started as another monthly dinner took a shocking turn when her children treated her like invisible help in her own home. Cassandra wasn't your typical grieving widow. For 5 years since Robert's death, she had quietly endured being dismissed and overlooked, known for her patience and sacrifice. When her family ignored her stories once again, she had no idea she was about to reclaim her voice. Her announcement would change everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of 5-spiced duck and steamed whole fish filled the Victorian dining room as Cassandra Hemingway made her final adjustments to the elaborate spread. She had risen at dawn to prepare the traditional feast. Hand-pulled noodles, mapopo tofu, twice-cooked pork, and her mother's recipe for lion's head meatballs that took 3 hours to perfect. The mahogany table polished to mirror brightness groaned under the weight of a dozen dishes arranged on her grandmother's blue and white porcelain. Each piece a survivor of the journey from Taiwan 50 years ago. At 68, Cassandra still moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to feeding multitudes, though these monthly dinners had dwindled from celebrations to obligations. She glanced at the antique clock. 7:15. David would arrive precisely at 7:30, his punctuality as calculated as everything else in his life. Linda had texted twice about traffic, her perpetual lateness disguised as circumstances beyond her control. James, if he came at all, would slip in through the kitchen door with mumbled apologies and the particular stillness of someone counting days of sobriety. The doorbell's chime echoed through the house's generous rooms. Cassandra smoothed her navy silk blouse. Robert had always said it brought out her eyes and opened the door to find David adjusting his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. "Mom." He kissed her cheek without looking up from his screen. "Sorry, crisis at the Singapore office. Time zones. You know how it is." She didn't know. Actually, Robert had built their import business on relationships, on sitting across from people and sharing tea before discussing terms. But David's world moved at digital speed measured in quarterly projections and leveraged acquisitions. "The food will get cold," Cassandra said, watching him stride toward the living room, still typing. "Just need to finish this email." 5 minutes. Linda's minivan pulled into the driveway with a screech of brakes and the immediate chaos of car door slamming. Cassandra's daughter emerged looking frazzled, her hair escaping its ponytail while her 3 children, Sophia, 12, Marcus, 9, and little Emma, 6, tumbled out like puppies. "Mom, I'm so sorry we're late." Marcus had a meltdown about his soccer cleat, and Emma decided she needed to bring her entire American Girl collection. And then Miguel couldn't find his keys. Linda's words rushed together as she herded her children toward the door, laid in with diaper bags and forgotten homework. "Abela." Emma launched herself at Cassandra's legs, the only grandchild young enough to still offer unguarded affection. "Hello, my little flower." Cassandra hugged the girl close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and playground dirt. "Are you hungry?" "Starving. Dad said we might get McDonald's, but Mom said we had to wait for your cooking." Behind them, Linda's husband, Miguel, approached with apologetic eyes and tired shoulders. He worked double shifts at the hospital and still made time for these dinners, understanding their importance even when his wife sometimes forgot. "Sorry, Cassandra. Long day in the ER." "You work too hard," she said, meaning it. Miguel reminded her of Robert. Quiet strength wrapped in genuine kindness. The kitchen door creaked, and James appeared as if summoned by the family's arrival. At 35, he still had the lean build of someone who forgot to eat. His musician's hands nervous and constantly moving. He'd been sober for 8 months, 4 days. Cassandra knew because she counted along with him, marking each milestone in her private prayers. "Hey, Mom." His hug lasted longer than David's pre-functor greeting, and Cassandra felt the subtle tremor in his hands that meant he was having a difficult day. "I made your favorite," she whispered. "The dumplings with the crispy bottoms." Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude maybe, or pain at being seen so clearly. They gathered around the dining room table like actors taking familiar positions. David sat at the head, the place Robert had once occupied, his phone face down, but somehow still commanding his attention. Linda corralled her children while simultaneously serving plates and apologizing for everything. The noise, the lateness, Marcus' grass-stained shirt. Miguel approached quietly, his presence a calming anchor in Linda's storm of anxiety. "This looks incredible, Mom," Linda said, finally settling into her chair. "I don't know how you do it. I can barely manage spaghetti on a good day." Cassandra smiled, accepting the compliment that felt more like an admission of defeat than praise. She watched her family fill their plates with the dishes that had taken her entire day to prepare. Conversations flowing around her as if she were a piece of furniture. Pleasant, useful, but not requiring acknowledgement. "Your father," Cassandra began, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter, "used to say that family dinners were the foundation of everything, that no matter how far we traveled or how busy life became, we could always come home to this table." The conversation continued around her as if she hadn't spoken. David was back on his phone, typing furiously. Linda was wiping Emma's face while negotiating with Marcus about vegetables. Miguel was asking polite questions about Cassandra's garden that nobody else bothered to answer. James ate methodically, present in body, if not entirely in spirit. "You're believed," Cassandra continued, her voice slightly louder, "that sharing a meal was sharing life itself, that the stories we told over rice and tea were what made us a family, not just people who happened to share the same last name." Linda murmured absently, cutting Sophia's duck into smaller pieces. David's phone rang. "I have to take this," he said, already standing. "Hong Kong won't wait." Cassandra watched him disappear into the kitchen, his voice carrying back to us in rapid aggressive tones about market positions and profit margins. She looked around the table at the faces of her children and grandchildren, seeing the familiar pattern of distraction and polite disinterest that had become their new tradition. Something inside her chest tightened, then suddenly released. After 68 years of bending, accommodating, and making herself smaller to fit into other people's comfort zones, Cassandra Hemingway felt a sensation she barely recognized. The sharp, clean edge of her own voice. She stood up slowly, her hands steady as she placed her napkin beside her untouched plate. The table didn't notice at first. Linda was still negotiating with Marcus. Miguel was helping Emma with her chopsticks. And James was lost in his own thoughts. Only Tyler, David's 16-year-old son, who'd been quietly observing from the corner, looked up with curious eyes. "This," Cassandra said, her voice carrying the authority of 50 years in this house, "will be our last dinner here." The table went silent. Even the children stopped eating, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "I've decided to sell the house," Cassandra continued, each word precise and deliberate. "I'll be moving to Sunset Gardens retirement community next month." David's voice stopped mid-sentence in the kitchen. Linda's fork clattered against her plate. James sat perfectly still. His recovery-trained instincts recognized the moment when everything changes. "The realtor will be here Monday for the assessment." The silence stretched like a held breath filled with the weight of assumptions crumbling and the sound of Cassandra Hemingway finally definitively speaking her truth. David Hemingway's hands trembled as he poured himself a scotch in his downtown apartment. The amber liquid catching the city lights that sparkled beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. The luxury high-rise had been his victory lap after the divorce, a symbol of his independence and success. Now it felt like a gilded cage, its mortgage payments bleeding him dry while he maintained the illusion of prosperity. He speed-dialed his financial advisor, pacing the hardwood floors as the phone rang. "Rick, it's David. I need to talk about the Hemingway collateral situation." His voice cracked slightly on his mother's maiden name, the one that still graced the business accounts. "There's been a development." 20 minutes later, David stared at spreadsheets that told a story he'd been avoiding for months. Without his mother's house as collateral, his expansion into Southeast Asian markets would collapse. The Singapore partners expected guarantees he couldn't provide, and his ex-wife's alimony demands had already stretched his liquid assets to breaking point. The irony wasn't lost on him. He built his entire business strategy around inheriting a house his mother had never promised to leave him. His phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Grandma seemed sad tonight. Why did everyone ignore her stories? David stared at the message, his son's moral compass cutting deeper than any financial projection. When had Tyler become the family's moral compass? When had a 16-year-old developed more emotional intelligence than the adults supposedly guiding him? Linda Rodriguez sat in her Honda Odyssey in her mother's driveway, tears streaming down her cheeks as her family waited inside their modest suburban home. Miguel had taken the children inside with promises of ice cream and Netflix, understanding that his wife needed space. The guilt crashed over her in waves. How many times had she arrived late, distracted, treating these dinners like obligations to be endured rather than gifts to be cherished? How many times had she silenced her mother's stories with half-hearted acknowledgments while juggling her children's demands? Her phone rang. Miguel, checking on her. "I'm a terrible daughter," she sobbed into the phone. "She's been planning this for months and I never even noticed she was unhappy." "Amore, you're not terrible. You're overwhelmed. There's a difference." "Is there?" "She made that incredible meal and I didn't even thank her properly. I was too busy worrying about Marcus' homework and Sophia's attitude and Emma's sugar crash. When did I stop seeing her as a person instead of just grandmother help?" Miguel's voice was gentle but honest. "You've been caring a lot, Linda. Taking care of everyone. But maybe your mom needs taken care of, too." Linda wiped her eyes, staring up at the Victorian house where warm light still glowed in the kitchen windows. Her mother was probably in there now cleaning up after a dinner that nobody had properly appreciated, processing her family's shocked silence in solitude. "The house, Miguel, if she sells it," Linda's voice caught. "That's our safety net. If something happens to you, if I lose my job, if the kids I miss having someone to share the day with," she'd said quietly. "Not just the big things, but the small ones. The way the morning light hits the garden, or how the neighbor's cat has started visiting the back porch. Your father used to listen to all of it." James had made some inadequate response about how they all loved her, how she wasn't alone. But the truth was she was alone. They visited her. They didn't share life with her. His phone rang. His sponsor Mike returning an earlier call. "How are you doing, kid? My mom just blew up our family and I think she's the only one who's being honest. Want to talk about it?" James found himself describing not just the evening's announcement, but the years of slow marginalization he'd witnessed. How his successful brother treated their mother like a resource to be managed. How his overwhelmed sister had delegated emotional labor to guilt and obligation. How he himself had been so focused on not using that he'd forgotten to actually live. "Sounds like your mom just set a boundary." Mike said, "Recovery teaches us that we can't control other people's choices, only our own responses to them. My siblings are going to lose their minds. David's probably already planning some intervention. And what are you going to do?" James stopped walking, finding himself in front of the music store where he'd bought his first guitar 30 years ago. Through the window display, instruments gleamed under security lighting, tools for creating beauty, for expressing truth, for connecting with something larger than oneself. "I'm going to support her," he said, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "For the first time in years, I'm going to actually support my mother instead of just existing around her." Cassandra Hemingway sat in her quiet kitchen, still wearing her navy silk blouse, surrounded by the detritus of a dinner that had ended in shocked silence. Dishes soaked in soapy water, leftovers waited to be wrapped, and the scent of five-spice and star anise still lingered in the air like a benediction. She should feel regret. 68 years of people-leasing and conflict avoidance suggested she should be crafting apologies, softening her announcement, making everyone else's comfort her priority. Instead, she felt something she barely recognized. Relief. Her phone rang and Patricia Wong's voice filled the kitchen through the speaker. "How did it go?" "Exactly as we expected. Shock, silence, and what I suspect will be a very long week of family meetings and emotional manipulation. Any regrets? Cassandra considered the question, watching soapy water swirl down the drain. I regret that it took me 5 years of loneliness to find my voice. I regret that Robert didn't live to see me become brave. He knew you were brave, Cassie. You immigrated to a new country, learned a new language, raised 3 children, and helped build a business from nothing. That's not the resume of a coward. Then why do I feel like I've been hiding for so long? Pat's voice was gentle but firm. Because grief makes us small sometimes. Because children grow up and forget that parents are people. Because somewhere along the way, you started measuring your worth by how little trouble you caused instead of how much joy you brought. Cassandra dried her hands on the tea towel Robert had brought back from their last trip to Taiwan. Their pilgrimage to her childhood village where they'd visited her parents' graves. And she'd finally made peace with the girl who'd left everything behind for love. I toured 3 apartments at Sunset Gardens last week. They have a book club, a garden committee, and Tai Chi classes every morning. There's a woman named Eleanor who taught high school English for 40 years and wants to start a writing workshop. Another woman, Grace, is organizing trips to the symphony. That sounds wonderful. It sounds like a life, Pat. My own life, not just the space left over after everyone else's needs are met. Cassandra walked through her house, turning off lights and checking locks. Her footsteps echoing in rooms that had hosted decades of family celebrations, arguments, homework sessions, and quiet moments with Robert. Tomorrow, those rooms would be appraised, photographed, and reduced to square footage and market comparisons. But tonight, they were still hers, filled with the echoes of her announcement and the promise of a future she was finally brave enough to claim. Linda's living room had never felt so small. David had arrived precisely at 10 a.m. with a leather portfolio and the rigid posture of someone conducting a hostile takeover. He'd rearranged the furniture to face Cassandra's chair, transforming the cozy space into an interrogation room. Linda fluttered between the kitchen and living room, offering coffee and apologies and equal measure, while Miguel kept the children occupied upstairs with strategic bribes of screen time. I've prepared some materials, David announced, extracting color-coded charts from his portfolio, financial projections, care options, and a comprehensive proposal that addresses Mom's concerns while protecting family assets. She's not a corporate acquisition. James slouched in the corner armchair, his musician's fingers drumming silently against his jeans. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got us here, David snapped. While you've been playing guitar and coffee shops, I've been building a future for this family. The house is worth $2.3 million. That's not just money. It's security, education funds, retirement planning. Whose retirement? James asked quietly. Because I'm pretty sure Mom's retirement is exactly what we're discussing. Cassandra entered the room with the measured grace of someone who'd expected this ambush. She wore a charcoal suit that Linda had never seen before, armor disguised as business attire. Patricia Wong followed 2 steps behind, her presence immediately shifting the room's dynamics. I brought backup, Cassandra said mildly, settling into the designated hot seat. I hope that's acceptable. David's jaw tightened. This is a family matter. Pat is family, Cassandra replied. She's been more present for the last 5 years than most of the people in this room. Linda winced at the accuracy of that observation. When had she last called her mother just to talk? When had she last visited without an agenda of childcare needs or holiday planning? Mom, we're worried about you, Linda began, her prepared speech dissolving into genuine emotion. This decision seems so sudden, so drastic. We just want to make sure you've thought it through. I've been thinking it through for months, Cassandra said. The sudden part was my announcement, not my decision. David leaned forward, his corporate presentation voice engaging. Let's look at the facts. You're 68, in good health, living independently in a house you love. Why disrupt that? Why not stay put and let us help more? Help with what exactly? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David's charts and projections hadn't included specifics about actual assistance, just vague promises of increased family involvement. Well, maintenance, for instance, Linda offered. The yard work, the repairs. I have a lawn service and a handyman on retainer, Cassandra said. What else? Grocery shopping. Medical appointments. Linda trailed off, realizing she was describing services her mother had never needed. Social isolation, David said with the confidence of someone who'd Googled elderly care concerns that morning. Living alone can lead to depression, cognitive decline. I'm isolated at family dinners in my own house. I'm lonely, surrounded by children and grandchildren who treat me like wallpaper. How exactly would staying fix that? Tyler Hemingway spoke from the corner where he'd been quietly observing. Maybe if everyone paid attention instead of being on their phones all the time. Tyler, David's warning carrier edge. No, Dad. It's true. Grandma tells these amazing stories about traveling with Grandpa, about building the business, about her life before us, and everyone just ignores her like she doesn't matter unless she's cooking or babysitting. The room fell silent. Cassandra's eyes softened as she looked at her grandson. This young man who'd inherited his great-grandfather's gift for uncomfortable truths. James cleared his throat, his recovery-trained voice steady. I support Mom's decision. David whirled on him. Of course you do. You've got nothing to lose. I've got everything to lose, James said quietly. I'm losing the fantasy that we're a close family. I'm losing the illusion that we've been treating Mom well, but I'm choosing to support her autonomy over my own comfort. This is insane, David said, his corporate mask finally slipping completely. You're making a decision that affects all of us based on hurt feelings and some misguided quest for independence. I'm making a decision about my own life, Cassandra said, which is exactly what adults do. Tyler spoke again. His teenager voice carried unexpected weight. Dad, you haven't asked Grandma what she wants. You've told her what she should want. That's not the same thing. David stared at his son, seeing perhaps for the first time the young man Tyler was becoming, someone with his own moral compass, someone willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. What do you want, Mom? Linda asked quietly, the question finally emerging after an hour of assumptions and projections. Cassandra sat back down, her hands folded in her lap. I want to wake up excited about the day ahead instead of wondering who might need me. I want to have dinner with people who are interested in my thoughts, not just my cooking. I want to take art classes and join book clubs and maybe even travel somewhere I've never been. She looked at each of her children in turn. I want to be someone's friend, not just someone's mother. I want to matter for who I am, not what I do for other people. The room fell quiet, except for the distant sound of children playing upstairs and the hum of Linda's refrigerator. The charts and projections lay forgotten on the coffee table, irrelevant in the face of their mother's simple, devastating honesty. The realtor comes Monday, Cassandra said, standing to leave. You can spend the weekend accepting that, or you can spend it fighting reality. But my decision is made. Patricia rose with her and they moved toward the door like longtime allies executing a planned retreat. This isn't over, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Cassandra paused at the threshold. You're right. It's not over. It's beginning. For the first time in 5 years, my life is beginning again. The house felt different in the aftermath of the failed family meeting. Not smaller exactly, but somehow more honest. Cassandra moved through its rooms like a woman taking inventory, seeing each space with new eyes. The living room where Robert had read his newspapers every morning, marking articles he wanted to discuss over dinner. The kitchen where she'd taught 3 reluctant children to fold dumplings, their small hands clumsy with the delicate work of pleading dough. The master bedroom where she still slept on her side of the bed, leaving Robert's pillow untouched. She paused at the photo gallery that lined the hallway. 40 years of Christmas mornings, graduations, wedding days, and birthday celebrations. In the earliest photos, she looked so young, her face bright with the possibility of the American dream. Robert stood beside her in his good suit, his arm protective around his waist as they posed in front of their first apartment, then their first house, then finally this Victorian mansion that had represented the summit of their shared ambitions. The progression told a story she'd never noticed before. In the early photos, she was always in the center, the bridge between Robert and the children, the organizer of gatherings, the keeper of traditions. But somewhere in the middle years, she'd begun to fade to the edges of the frame, becoming background to her children's achievements, her husband's success, her grandchildren's milestones. When did I disappear from my own life? Cassandra climbed the stairs to the attic, a space she'd avoided since Robert's death. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through the small windows, illuminating boxes labeled in her careful handwriting. Christmas decorations, children's school papers, Robert's business files. But it was the unmarked box in the corner that drew her attention, one she'd hidden away 5 years ago because the contents had been too painful to face. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed with age, were the remnants of dreams she'd set aside. Her college acceptance letter to art school, the one she'd never pursued because marriage and immigration seemed more important, sketches she'd made during stolen moments when the children were napping, landscapes, portraits, abstract compositions that had poured from her fingers like prayers. The business plan she'd written for a small gallery featuring Asian American artists, complete with budgets and vendor lists and a mission statement about building cultural bridges through art. At the bottom of the box, she found Robert's letters from their brief longue distance courtship when he traveled to America to establish the business while she finished her obligations to her family in Taiwan. His English had been careful then, formal, but his affection had blazed through every sentence. My dearest Cassandra, I know you worry about leaving your art behind, but please remember, you are not abandoning your dreams, only transplanting them. In America, you will have opportunities to grow in ways impossible here. Promise me, you will not let marriage make you smaller. I want to build a life with the woman I fell in love with. The one who sees beauty everywhere and captures it with her hands. Cassandra sat back on her heels, tears blurring her vision. When had she stopped seeing beauty everywhere? When had she last held a pencil for anything other than grocery lists and appointment reminders? She descended to the kitchen and called Patricia. I need you to drive me somewhere, she said without preamble. Where? Sunset Gardens. I want to see it again. The retirement communities sprawled across landscaped grounds that managed to feel both cultivated and natural. Cassandra had toured it once before secretly, but today she walked its paths with purpose. Patricia trailed behind as Cassandra explored the art studio, the library, the community garden where residents tended raised beds filled with vegetables and flowers. Mrs. Hemingway, Eleanor Patterson, the former English teacher, waved from a bench outside the administration building. How lovely to see you again. Are you here for the afternoon lecture series? Dr. Martinez is speaking about the influence of Chinese poetry on contemporary American literature. Cassandra felt something inside her chest loosen. When was the last time anyone had invited her to something because they thought she'd be interested, not because they needed her help? I'd love to attend, she said. The lecture hall buzzed with conversations about books, travel, current events, discussions between peers who saw each other as interesting people rather than sources of service. Cassandra found herself sitting between Eleonora and Grace Morrison, the symphony organizer. Both women eager to include her in their ongoing debate about the relevance of traditional literary forms in digital age. What's your background? Grace asked. Eleanor mentioned you might join our workshop. I was an art student a long time ago before marriage, before children, before life got in the way. Life doesn't get in the way, Eleanor said firmly. Life is the way. The question is whether we're driving or just along for the ride. Dr. Martinez's lecture explored the intersection of Eastern and Western poetic traditions, analyzing how immigrant voices had enriched American literature. Cassandra found herself taking notes, her mind engaging with ideas in a way it hadn't for years. During the question period, she surprised herself by raising her hand. I'm curious about the visual elements in the poems you've discussed. There seems to be a strong connection between the imagery and traditional Chinese brush painting techniques. Dr. Martinez's eyes lit up. That's an excellent observation. Are you familiar with Chinese art? Some, Cassandra said modestly. I painted before. The art studio here offers classes in traditional Asian techniques. Grace whispered. You should talk to Chenny. He teaches watercolor and calligraphy. After the lecture, Cassandra wandered through the halls studying the artwork that decorated the walls. Not just generic landscapes and still lives, but pieces created by residents, bold abstracts, delicate watercolors, sculptural works that spoke of hands that had learned new skills in their 7th and 8th decades. Impressive, isn't it? Eleanor joined her in front of a vibrant painting of a jazz musician. All flowing lines and explosive color. That's by Margaret Steinberg. She was an accountant for 40 years, never picked up a brush until she moved here at 72. Now she's having her first gallery show next month. It's beautiful. She says art gives her a way to process all the experiences she accumulated during her working years. Like she's finally found the vocabulary to express what she's been feeling all along. Cassandra understood exactly what Margaret Steinberg meant. That evening, Cassandra sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his business papers and family photographs. She opened her laptop, a recent purchase that had scandalized David, who couldn't understand why she needed her own computer, and began typing. Application for residency. Sunset Gardens Retirement Community. The form asked for basic information, financial details, and one essay question. Describe what you hope to accomplish during this new phase of your life. Cassandra stared at the blank screen for a long time, then began to write. For 50 years, I have defined myself through my relationships to others. As a daughter, wife, mother, grandmother. These roles have brought me great joy and deep satisfaction, but they have also required me to make myself smaller in order to fit into other people's comfort zones. I sacrificed my art dreams for family obligations, my independence for domestic harmony, my voice for the illusion of peace. I am not leaving my family behind. I am choosing to rejoin them as a whole person rather than a collection of useful functions. I want to spend my remaining years growing instead of shrinking, creating instead of maintaining, exploring instead of simply enduring. At Sunset Gardens, I hope to rediscover the artist I set aside, the intellectual I never fully developed, the friend I could be to people who see me as more than the sum of my services. I am 68 years old and I am finally ready to bloom. She submitted the application at 11:47 p.m. Then sat in the quiet study where Robert's presence still lingered in the scent of his cologne and the weight of his ambitions. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like a possibility. Maria Santos arrived at the Victorian house with the punctuality of someone who understood that time was money. They stepped onto the back patio where Cassandra's garden spread in careful abundance. Raised beds held herbs and vegetables while perennial borders provided year-round structure and seasonal color. A small greenhouse tucked into the corner suggested serious gardening, not just decorative landscaping. I spend most mornings out here, Cassandra said. Robert built the greenhouse for our 20th anniversary. He said, if I was going to dirty my hands with plants, I might as well have proper tools. It's beautiful. The garden will be a major selling point. Mature landscaping like this takes decades to develop. Naria's phone buzzed with a text and she glanced at it automatically. I'm sorry, my daughter's school. She's feeling sick and wants to come home. How old? 14. At that age where everything is either a crisis or completely boring depending on the day. Cassandra smiled. I remember those years. My middle child, Linda, once convinced me she was dying of appendicitis because she didn't want to take a math test. Turned out she'd eaten too much Halloween candy. Did you work when your children were young? I helped Robert with the business, bookkeeping, customer relations, trade show coordination, but mostly I was home with the kids. Cassandra paused, studying the garden. I was an art student when we married. I always thought I'd go back to school eventually, but eventually never came. Maria heard something in Cassandra's voice that made her look up from her tablet. That must have been difficult, giving up your studies. At the time, it felt like the right choice. Family first, dreams second. Now, she gestured toward the house. Now, I'm wondering what I might have accomplished if I'd made different choices. It's not too late, Maria said gently. My mother went back to school at 65, became a certified master gardener. She says her 70s have been the most intellectually stimulating decade of her life. That's encouraging to hear. They continued the assessment, Maria noting architectural details and potential selling points, while Cassandra shared memories attached to different rooms. The formal dining room where holiday meals had created decades of family traditions. The library where Robert had conducted business calls while children did homework at his feet. The sun porch that had served as art studio, music practice room, and quiet retreat, depending on the family's evolving needs. Based on recent comparables in your neighborhood, I'm estimating a market value between 2.1 and 2.4 million, Maria said as they returned to the kitchen. The house is in exceptional condition. The location is desirable, and properties with this much character are rare. I expect significant interest. Cassandra nodded, though Maria noticed she seemed more relieved than excited by the financial projection. Can I ask about your family's feelings regarding the sale? I like to prepare for any complications that might arise. Cassandra's left held no humor. My eldest son assumed he'd inherit the house and has been planning business ventures around that assumption. My daughter worries about losing family security. My youngest son supports my decision but has no financial stake in the outcome. And my grandson seems to be the only one who understands that this is about my happiness, not their inheritance. That sounds complicated. It's clarifying, actually. 4 years, I've made decisions based on what other people needed. This time, I'm making a choice based on what I need. Maria's phone rang. Her daughter's school again. I'm so sorry. I need to take this. After a brief conversation, she hung up looking frustrated. Isabella definitely needs to come home, but my husband's in court and can't leave. And my mother is at her own doctor's appointment. The challenges of the sandwich generation. I could drive you, Cassandra offered. I'm not doing anything urgent, and I remember those days of trying to juggle everyone's needs. Maria looked surprised. That's incredibly kind, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. It's one woman helping another. Besides, I'd like to see more of the city from someone else's perspective. 20 minutes later, Cassandra found herself in the passenger seat of Maria's Jeep heading toward Roosevelt High School. The conversation flowed easily. Maria talking about the challenges of building her business while raising a teenager. Cassandra sharing stories of her own children's dramatic illnesses and creative excuses for avoiding school. You're a good mother, Cassandra said as they pulled into the school parking lot. I can tell by the way you talk about Isabella, the way you prioritize her needs even when it's inconvenient. Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything. Not present enough at home, not focused enough at work. The fact that you worry about that means you're not failing. My children are adults now, and I'm still learning how to balance their needs with my own. The difference is I'm finally putting my own needs in the equation. Isabella Santos emerged from the school looking genuinely pale and miserable. She perked up slightly when she saw Cassandra in the front seat. This is Mrs. Hemingway, Maria said. She offered to help us out today. Thank you, Isabella said politely, then turned to her mother. I really don't feel good, Mom. I know, mija. We'll get you home and settled. As they drove toward the Santos family home, Cassandra found herself thinking about the easy warmth between mother and daughter, the way Maria instinctively knew how to comfort without minimizing Isabella's discomfort. When had her own children stopped turning to her for comfort? When had she stopped being their source of safety and become simply their source of services? Would you like to come in for coffee? Maria asked as they pulled into her driveway. It's the least I can do after you rescued our afternoon. I'd like that very much. Inside Maria's kitchen, modern but warm, with family photos covering the refrigerator and Isabella's artwork decorating the walls, Cassandra felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of female friendship, not the careful choreography of family obligations, but the easy give and take of women who understood each other's challenges. You're making the right choice, Maria said quietly, handing Cassandra a cup of coffee. Moving to the retirement community. My mother made a similar decision after my father died. Best thing she ever did for herself and for us. Now, when we visit, It's because we want to see her, not because we feel guilty about her being alone. That's exactly what I hope for. The house will sail quickly, and when it does, you'll be ready for whatever comes next." Cassandra smiled, thinking of the application she'd submitted the night before, the art studio at Sunset Gardens, the conversations with people who saw her as interesting rather than useful. "I think I already am." The call came on Thursday morning when Cassandra was deadheading. Roses in her garden, the morning sun warm on her shoulders, and the scent of jasmine drifting from the neighbor's fence. She almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number, but something made her wipe her hands on her gardening apron and pick up. "Cassandra, this is Jennifer, David's ex-wife. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." Cassandra settled onto her garden bench, sensing this wasn't a social call. Jennifer's voice carried the careful tension of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Of course not, dear. How are you? How's Tyler adjusting to the new custody arrangement? That's actually part of why I'm calling." Jennifer paused, and Cassandra could hear the sound of coffee being stirred, the nervous energy of someone building courage. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Tyler's worried about you, and frankly, so am I. David's been using your address for his business correspondence." "What do you mean?" "His new Singapore investors require significant collateral for the partnership agreement. David's been representing your house as available security for business loans. The paperwork I saw during our divorce proceedings. Cassandra, he's been planning to use your home to guarantee nearly $3 million in international investments." The words hit Cassandra like cold water. She stood up from the bench, pacing among her rose bushes as the implications settled. "He never asked my permission for anything like that. He told his business partners that family assets were available, that he had expectations regarding inheritance. Tyler overheard a phone call where David was discussing potential legal challenges to your competency if you didn't cooperate with his business plans." Cassandra felt her knees weakened. She sat back down heavily, staring at the house she'd poured 40 years of love into. The house her eldest son apparently viewed as his personal ATM. "Jennifer, why are you telling me this?" "Because Tyler asked me to. He's 16, Cassandra, and he's more mature than his father. He's terrified that David is going to hurt you to protect his business interests. And honestly, after watching David's behavior during our divorce, I wouldn't put it past him." After Jennifer hung up, Cassandra sat in her garden for a long time. Bees humming around the lavender border and birds calling from the oak tree Robert had planted when James was born. The peaceful morning felt surreal against the ugliness of what she just learned. Her phone rang again. Miguel Rodriguez, Linda's husband. "Cassandra, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to talk to you about Linda's reaction to your announcement." "Of course, Miguel. I know this is difficult for everyone." The thing is, Miguel's voice was careful, professional, his doctor tone, that meant he was delivering news that required delicacy. "Linda's been having panic attacks since Sunday night. She's not sleeping. She's snapping at the kids. And yesterday she called in sick to work because she couldn't stop crying." James stared into his coffee for a long moment before looking up. "I need to tell you something about my addiction, about why I started drinking." Cassandra waited, giving him space to find his words. It wasn't just the music industry or the pressure to succeed or any of the obvious reasons. It was this family. The way we all pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. The way nobody ever talked about real feelings or problems. "James, let me finish, please." His voice was gentle but insistent. "After Dad died, I watched you shrink a little more every day. I watched David treat you like a business asset and Linda treat you like a burden disguised as love. I watched Tyler try to be the grandson who paid attention while his father ignored everything that mattered." Cassandra felt tears building behind her eyes. "And I did nothing. I was so focused on not drinking that I forgot how to actually live, how to actually connect with people. I let you disappear in your own house because dealing with family stuff felt dangerous to my sobriety. Your sobriety has to come first." "No, Mom. My recovery has to include learning how to have real relationships with people I love." And I've been hiding behind meetings and sponsors instead of showing up for you. James reached across the table and took her hand. What you're doing selling the house, moving to Sunset Gardens, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. You're choosing life over maintenance, growth over safety. And I want you to know that I support you completely. Thank you, Cassandra whispered. There's something else. David's been calling me trying to get me to join some kind of intervention. He wants to present a united front about your declining judgment and need for family oversight. And I told him to go to hell. Well, not exactly that, but close. I told him that if he can't respect your autonomy, he doesn't deserve your presence in his life. That evening, Tyler arrived. As Cassandra was preparing a simple dinner for one, a luxury she was learning to enjoy rather than see as evidence of loneliness. He looked agitated, his teenage awkwardness more pronounced than usual. Grandma, I need to tell you something about Dad. She set down her cooking spoon and gave him her full attention. What is it? He's been on the phone with lawyers about having you declared incompetent or something. He thinks if he can prove you're not thinking clearly, he can stop the house sale. Cassandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Are you sure? He heard him talking to Uncle David, Mom's brother, who's a lawyer in Portland. He was asking about guardianship laws and medical evaluations and stuff like that. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. Grandma, he's really going to try to hurt you. Tyler, I need you to know that whatever happens between your father and me, it won't change how much I love you. I love you too, but I also think what you're doing is right. You should get to choose your own life. She hugged her grandson, this young man who somehow understood what the adults around him could not grasp, that love meant supporting someone's choices, not controlling them. Later that night, Patricia arrived with a bottle of wine and the militant expression of someone ready for battle. I've been talking to my attorney friend Helen, Pat said without preamble, settling into Cassandra's lading room like a general establishing a command post. She specializes in elder law, and she says David's potential legal challenges are mostly bluster. Mostly. Well, he could try to have you evaluated for competency, but given that you're clearly functioning independently, managing your own finances competently, and making rational decisions about your future, no court in this state would find grounds for guardianship. Pat poured wine into 2 glasses, her movements sharp with controlled anger. What infuriates me is that he's trying to use the legal system to override your autonomy. It's exactly the kind of thing that gives adult children a bad name. Jennifer called today. Apparently, David's been representing my house as collateral for his business investments without your knowledge or permission without even asking. Pat's expression darkened. That's financial fraud, Cassie. If he's used your property as security for loans without your consent, he's committed a crime. Cassandra sipped her wine, processing the day's revelations. Her eldest son was prepared to challenge her mental competency to protect his business interests. Her daughter was having panic attacks about the possibility of losing family obligations disguised as family connection. Her youngest son was finally learning how to show up for people he loved, and her grandson had more emotional intelligence than most of the adults in his family. What a mess we've all made, she said quietly. No, Pat said firmly. What a mess they've made by treating you like property instead of a person. You're the only one in this family who's being honest about what's really happening. I never wanted it to be this ugly. Sometimes things have to get ugly before they can be honest. David's showing you who he really is. Believe him. Linda is showing you what she's really afraid of. Help her face it. James is showing you who he wants to become. Support that. And Tyler is showing you what love actually looks like. Treasure it. Cassandra looked around her living room, seeing it with new eyes. Tomorrow, Maria would return with photographers to prepare the listing. Next week, strangers would walk through these rooms, evaluating them as potential homes for their own families. The thought should have been devastating, but instead it felt like liberation. I'm ready, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. For what? For whatever comes next. For the legal challenges, the family drama, the difficult conversations. I'm ready to fight for my right to choose my own life. Pat raised her wine glass. To choosing life over maintenance, to choosing growth over safety, Cassandra replied, clinking glasses with her friend. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its familiar evening rhythms. Porch lights coming on, families gathering for dinner, the distant sound of children playing in backyards. Soon this would no longer be her neighborhood. These would no longer be her evening sounds. But for the first time in 5 years, the prospect of change felt like possibility rather than loss. There is something, Richard said slowly. But David, I'm not recommending it, and I won't help you pursue it. What you could attempt to have Mom evaluated for diminished capacity. It would require testimony from family members about concerning behaviors, medical testimony about potential cognitive decline, and a formal court hearing. David's eyes lit up. How long would that take? Months, maybe longer if she fights it, which she would. And David, you'd lose. Worse than that, you'd destroy your relationship with your mother permanently and probably traumatize Tyler in the process, but it would delay the sale. David stared at his brother-in-law with unconcealed disgust. Is that really what you want? To drag your 68-year-old mother through a public competency hearing because your business planning was based on stealing her assets? David's phone rang, his Singapore contact, demanding updates on the collateral situation. He declined the call, but both men could see the sweat beating on his forehead. I need to think about this, David muttered, gathering his papers. David, don't do something you can't undo. Mom's not the enemy here. Your poor planning is. That evening, Linda Rodriguez stood in her kitchen, mechanically preparing dinner while her family moved around her with the careful navigation of people walking through a minefield. Miguel had taken charge of homework supervision and bedtime routines, recognizing that his wife was barely holding herself together. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. Emergency family meeting tomorrow night. We need to present a united front. She stared at the message, exhaustion and guilt warring in her chest. She thought about her last conversation with her mother, the careful politeness that had replaced their once easy relationship. She thought about Tyler's accusation that they all ignored their grandmother's stories. She thought about Miguel's observation that she wanted permission to stop feeling guilty about having her own life. Mommy. Sophia appeared at her elbow, her 12-year-old face creased with worry. Are you okay? You seem sad all the time now. Linda looked down at her daughter, seeing her own anxious tendencies already emerging in Sophia's careful monitoring of family emotional temperature. Was this what she wanted to teach her children? That love meant endless guilt and obligation? I'm working through some grown-up stuff, Mija. It's not your job to worry about it. Is it about Abua selling her house? Linda was startled by Sophia's direct whiz. What do you know about that? Tyler told us. He says Uncle David is being mean to Abua and everyone's upset because they won't get money from her house. The casual accuracy of Sophia's assessment was devastating. When had her family dynamics become so obvious that children could summarize them with brutal clarity? What do you think about Abua's decision? Linda asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective. Sophia considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all family matters. I think if Abua wants to live somewhere else, she should get to. It's her house, right? And maybe she'll be happier somewhere with more friends her age. But what about family dinners? What about traditions? We could still have dinner with her, just not at her house. She shrugged with 12-year-old pragmatism. By the sides, those dinners weren't that fun anyway. Everyone was always on their phones or arguing about stuff. Linda felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar weight of guilt, but something lighter. Permission maybe, or just the recognition that her daughter understood something she'd been afraid to acknowledge. You're right. Those dinners weren't very fun. Could we visit Abua at her new place? Just us, without Uncle David being grumpy all the time? I think Abua would love that very much. James arrived at Cassandra's house that evening to find her sitting in Robert's study, surrounded by legal documents and looking more determined than he'd seen her since his father's death. How did it go with the lawyer? He asked, settling into the chair where Robert used to read his evening newspapers. Enlightening. Apparently, I have more legal rights than David would like me to believe. James smiled. Amazing how the law supports people making their own decisions about their own lives. Helen, my attorney, also confirmed that David's use of my house as collateral without permission is potentially fraudulent. She's documenting everything in case his business partners try to claim rights to the property. Jesus, I knew David was desperate, but I didn't realize he was potentially criminal. Cassandra handed him a text message thread from David demanding her presence at another family meeting. He's not giving up. Helen warned me that desperate people sometimes escalate their tactics. Mom, you know I support you completely, right? Whatever David tries, whatever pressure the family applies, I'm on your side. I know. And James, that means more to me than you realize. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the study quiet except for the tick of Robert's grandfather clock and the distant sound of evening traffic. Can I ask you something? James said. Are you scared? Cassandra considered the question honestly, terrified, but not of David's legal threats or family disapproval. I'm scared of being brave enough to build a life that's actually mine. That's a good kind of scared, though. Recovery taught me the difference between fear that warns you away from danger and fear that warns you away from growth. This feels like growth fear. Growth fear. The kind of scared you feel when you're about to do something that will change you in ways you can't predict. It's uncomfortable, but it's also how you know you're moving in the right direction. Cassandra nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Selling the house, moving to Sunset Gardens, reclaiming her identity as an individual rather than just a family function. All of it felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. James, tomorrow, David is going to try to pressure you into joining his intervention. What will you do? I'm going to tell him that I've spent 8 months learning the difference between helping someone and controlling them. And I'm going to remind him that love means supporting people's choices, not overriding them. Even if you think their choices are wrong, especially then. Recovery taught me that I can't manage other people's lives. Even people I love. The best thing I can do for you is show up authentically and let you make your own decisions. Cassandra felt tears building behind her eyes. When did you become so wise? When I got desperate enough to listen to people who knew more than I did. James leaned forward, his recovery-trained earnestness replacing his usual deflective humor. Mom, you're not just changing your living situation. You're modeling autonomy and self-respect for your grandchildren. You're showing Tyler and Sophia and Marcus and Emma that people get to choose their own lives even when those choices are inconvenient for other people. I hadn't thought about it that way. Trust me, they're watching. And what they're learning is that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for other people's comfort. That's a lesson that could change their entire lives. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythms. Families turning on porch lights and gathering for dinner. Tomorrow would bring David's intervention attempt, more family pressure, and probably escalated threats about legal challenges. But tonight, sitting in her late husband's study with her youngest son, Cassandra felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet confidence of someone who knows she's fighting for the right thing. The for ale sign appeared in Cassandra's front yard at 8 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning. Its burgundy and gold Santos Properties placard gleaming like a declaration of war. By 8:15, 3 neighbors had called with questions disguised as concern. And by 9 a.m., Mrs. Patterson from across the street was standing on Cassandra's front porch with a casserole and barely concealed curiosity. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the sign, Mrs. Patterson said, holding the covered dish like an offering. Harold and I always assumed you'd be here forever. This house has been the anchor of the neighborhood for so long. Cassandra accepted the casserole with genuine gratitude, understanding that food was Mrs. Patterson's way of processing neighborhood changes that felt too big for simple conversation. Thank you, Dorothy. This is very thoughtful. May I ask, are you moving somewhere nearby? We'd hate to lose you entirely. Sunset Gardens Retirement Community. I'm excited about the change. Oh my, that's quite lovely. Harold and I toured there last year just to see. The amenities are remarkable. It is a beautiful place. I'm looking forward to the art classes and the book club. And the house. It must be worth. Mrs. Patterson caught herself before finishing the financial speculation, but her meaning was clear. Maria Santos is handling everything. She's been wonderful to work with. Inside the house, Maria and her staging team were transforming 40 years of family life into a magazine-worthy showcase. Personal photographs disappeared into boxes, replaced by neutral artwork that suggested possibility rather than history. Cassandra retreated to the garden, unable to watch strangers reduce her home to a series of marketable images. Her phone buzzed constantly. David demanding to know why she hadn't consulted the family before listing. Linda asking if she was sure about the timing. Neighbors requesting details about the sale price. Only I'm not caught in the middle. I'm on your side. Tyler's voice held the clear certainty of someone who'd thought through his position carefully. Dad's treating you like you exist to solve his problems. That's not how families are supposed to work. Tyler, whatever happens between your father and me, I need you to remember that he loves you. He's just lost right now. Maybe, but loving someone doesn't give you the right to control them. At 16, Tyler had somehow developed clearer boundaries than most of the adults in his family. Cassandra wondered if growing up watching family dysfunction had taught him to recognize unhealthy patterns, or if his generation simply understood autonomy in ways that hers never had. The first showing is tomorrow afternoon, she told him. Maria says there's already significant interest from 3 potential buyers. That's great. Are you nervous? Terrified but also excited. Is that normal? Tyler grinned. Probably. I felt the same way when I decided to quit baseball to focus on debate team. Scared of disappointing Dad, but excited about doing something that was actually mine. That evening, David's financial world continued its rapid collapse. His Singapore partners had delivered an ultimatum. Provide guaranteed collateral by Friday or the deal was terminated. His accountant had reviewed every possible asset restructuring scenario and found them all insufficient. His lawyer brother-in-law refused to pursue guardianship proceedings against Cassandra. And now his mother's house, the foundation of his entire expansion strategy, was officially on the market. He sat in his apartment surrounded by financial documents and unanswered phone calls, calculating how quickly he could lose everything he'd spent 20 years building. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built his business empire on the assumption that he'd inherit his mother's sacrifice, only to discover that she'd stopped sacrificing and started living. His phone rang. Linda calling from her minivan. David, I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? The family meetings, the pressure campaigns, the guilt trips about Mom's decision. I'm exhausted and I'm making my children anxious. And I think Mom's right to want something different. David felt his last ally slipping away. Linda, you can't be serious. This affects all of us. Your kids' college funds, your financial security. My kids' security comes from their parents working hard and making good decisions, not from counting on inheritance money. And honestly, David, that house was never ours. It was always Mom's. But family traditions. What traditions? Showing up late, ignoring Mom's stories, treating her like help in her own house. Those aren't traditions worth preserving. David could hear children's voices in the background. His nieces and nephew living their normal lives while his world fell apart around him. Linda, I need you to understand. Without the house's collateral, I lose everything. The business, the contracts, my reputation in the industry. Then maybe you shouldn't have built your business on assets you didn't own. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Linda's turn signal and NPR playing softly in the background. I'm going to visit Mom tomorrow to apologize for the last few weeks and to tell her I support her decision. You should consider doing the same. After Linda hung up, David stared at his phone, seeing missed calls from Singapore investors and text messages from business partners demanding updates on the collateral situation. He thought about Tyler's increasing distance, about James' flat refusal to participate in family pressure tactics, about Linda's defection to their mother's side. Maybe he'd been fighting the wrong battle. Maybe instead of trying to control his mother's choices, He should have been making better choices of his own. Wednesday afternoon brought the first official showing, and Cassandra found herself displaced from her own home, wandering the neighborhood while strangers evaluated her life's work. Maria had suggested she be absent during viewings, explaining that potential buyers needed space to envision their own families in the house without feeling like they were intruding on someone else's grief. She walked the familiar streets where she'd pushed strollers and walked dogs, where she'd chatted with neighbors about children's school performances and garden club fundraisers. The maple trees Robert had lobbied the city to plant 20 years ago now provided generous shade, their roots buckling sidewalks and patterns that told the story of time passing. Her phone rang. James calling from work. How are you holding up on showing day? It's surreal. 42 years of memories being evaluated by people who see square footage in market potential. Want me to come over tonight? We could order Chinese food and process the weirdness together. I'd like that very much. Any word from the Singapore incident? David has been unusually quiet today. Either he's planning something dramatic or he's finally accepting reality. With David, those might be the same thing. That evening, as promised, James arrived with takeout containers and the particular presence of someone committed to showing up authentically. They sat in the kitchen where Cassandra had fed her family for decades, eating lo mein with chopsticks and processing the strange experience of marketing a life. Maria says there were 3 separate showings today, all with serious potential buyers. One couple from California who are relocating for work. One family with teenage children who loved the library and the garden, and one woman about my age who's downsizing from an even larger house. How does that feel? Like watching someone else fall in love with your spouse. You want them to see all the wonderful qualities, but you also want them to understand what they're taking on. James smiled. That's a perfect analogy. This house has been like a marriage partner. Daily intimacy, shared history, the kind of love that includes both appreciation and frustration. Exactly. I want the new owners to understand that the kitchen faucet is temperamental, but the morning light is perfect for coffee. That the upstairs bathroom door sticks, but the view from the master bedroom window is worth the inconvenience. You're not just selling a house. You're transferring stewardship of a living space that has its own personality. They were interrupted by headlights in the driveway. Tyler arriving on his bicycle with the particular urgency of someone carrying important news. Grandma, something's happening with Dad. He's been on the phone all day and I think he's planning something for tomorrow. What kind of something? I don't know exactly, but he keeps talking about intervention specialists and family crisis management. And he asked me a bunch of weird questions about whether you've been forgetting things or acting confused. James and Cassandra exchanged glances. Tyler, do you think your father is planning to have Grandma evaluated for mental competency? Maybe he's been researching something on his laptop and he made an appointment with someone called Dr. Richardson for Friday afternoon. Cassandra felt her stomach drop. Helen Morrison had warned her that desperate family members sometimes escalated to professional intervention tactics, but she'd hoped David wouldn't actually pursue such measures. Tyler, I need you to understand that whatever happens, this isn't your fault. Your father is dealing with problems that have nothing to do with you. I know, but Grandma, he's really desperate. His business is falling apart, and he's blaming everyone except himself. James pulled out his phone. I'm calling Helen Morrison. If David's planning some kind of formal competency challenge, you need legal protection. It's 8 p.m. She gave you her emergency number for exactly this kind of situation. As James dialed, Cassandra looked around her kitchen, seeing it perhaps for the last time as simply her space rather than the center of a family crisis. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more attempts to override her autonomy, and probably the most serious threat yet to her right to choose her own life. But tonight, sitting with her youngest son and her grandson, both of whom understood that love meant supporting someone's choices rather than controlling them, she felt the quiet strength of someone who'd found her voice and intended to use it. Whatever David tries, I'm ready for it. I know who I am. I know what I want and I have people who support my right to choose my own life. Tyler reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We've got your back, Grandma. James hung up the phone with a grim expression. Helen says Dr. Richardson is a geriatric psychiatrist who sometimes does competency evaluations for families. She's calling him first thing tomorrow to make sure he understands the legal and ethical issues involved. And if David goes through with this, then we fight. But Helen thinks the fact that David's being secretive about this instead of talking to you directly actually works in your favor. It suggests he knows his actions aren't legitimate. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythms for perhaps the last time with Cassandra as a resident. By Friday, she might have a signed purchase agreement. By next month, she might be living at Sunset Gardens, starting the new chapter she'd been brave enough to write for herself. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home to herself. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on Friday morning, just as Cassandra was settling into her garden with coffee and the morning newspaper. Maria's voice carried an excitement that cut through the early autumn chill. "Cassandra, I have news. The Hendersons, the family with teenage children, want to make an offer. It's strong. Very strong." Cassandra sat down her coffee cup, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder Robert had built during his last summer. A house strong. 2.4 million, all cash, 30-day clothes, and they're willing to let you take whatever time you need to remove personal belongings. They fell in love with the house yesterday, especially the library and the garden. Mrs. Henderson said it felt like a place where a family could grow deep roots. The irony wasn't lost on Cassandra. The Hendersons wanted to plant the kind of roots she was finally brave enough to uproot. What's their timeline? They'd like an answer by Monday. Their financing is pre-approved. The inspection can happen next week, and they're hoping to move in before Thanksgiving so their kids can finish the school year here. Cassandra walked through her garden, past the tomato plants heavy with late harvest, the rose bushes Robert had planted for their 10th anniversary. The herb garden where she taught 3 children the difference between basil and oregano. All of it would soon belong to someone else, would nurture different dreams and witness different stories. It's a good offer, isn't it? It's an excellent offer. 20,000 over asking price, no contingencies, buyers who clearly understand they're purchasing something special. After Maria hung up, Cassandra sat among her roses, processing the reality that her brave new life was about to become concrete. By Monday, she could accept an offer that would change everything irrevocably. By Thanksgiving, strangers would be cooking their first meal in her kitchen, creating their own traditions in rooms that had witnessed 40 years of her family's joys and disappointments. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, Dr. Richardson's office, confirming your 2 p.m. appointment today for family consultation regarding cognitive assessment for families. Cassandra stared at the message, her stomach dropping. She hadn't made any such appointment. She immediately called Helen Morrison. "They're moving forward with it," Helen said grimly after Cassandra read the text. "I spoke with Dr. Richardson yesterday and he confirmed that David scheduled a family meeting to discuss concerns about your mental capacity. Can they do that without my permission? David can request a consultation, but you're under no obligation to attend. In fact, I strongly advise against it. Any participation could be interpreted as acknowledgement that there are legitimate concerns about your competency. What should I do? Nothing. Don't respond to the text. Don't call Dr. Richardson's office. And definitely don't show up for any appointment you didn't make. Or contact Dr. Richardson directly to clarify that you haven't consented to any evaluation and that any family concern should be directed through proper legal channels." Cassandra felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being treated like a problem to be solved, rather than a person making autonomous choices. "Helen, what if David tries to have me committed or something dramatic?" "He can't. Involuntary commitment requires evidence of immediate danger to yourself or others. Making rational decisions about your living situation, decisions that happen to inconvenience your son's business plans, doesn't qualify." After hanging up, Cassandra called Patricia. "Pack a bag," Pat said without hesitation. "You're staying with me today. If David wants to play games with medical professionals, he can do it without access to you. I can't hide from my own son." "You're not hiding. You're protecting yourself from manipulation tactics. There's a difference. At 1:30 p.m., David Hemingway sat in Dr. Richardson's waiting room with Linda and a folder of documentation he'd spent 2 days compiling. The geriatric psychiatrist had agreed to meet with family members expressing concerns about their mother's decision-making capacity, though he'd been clear that no formal evaluation could occur without Cassandra's consent. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, looking like someone who'd been dragged to a performance she didn't want to attend. David, I don't feel good about this. Mom's not thinking clearly. The house sale, the sudden move to a retirement community, the refusal to consider family input. These are signs of diminished judgment or signs of someone finally putting herself first. David turned to stare at his sister. Whose side are you on? I'm on Mom's side, which means supporting her right to make her own choices, even if those choices are inconvenient for us. Inconvenient. David's voice rose, drawing glances from other patients in the waiting room. Linda, this affects your children's future, your financial security. My children's future depends on their parents making good decisions, not on inheritance money from their grandmother. And David, honestly, the last few weeks have shown me exactly why Mom wants distance from this family. Dr. Richardson appeared in the waiting room doorway, a tall, gentle-looking man in his 60s, who radiated the particular calm of someone accustomed to family crisis. Mr. Hemingway, Miss Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Richardson. Before we begin, I should mention that I received a call from your mother's attorney this morning. David's stomach dropped. Her attorney, Helen Morrison. She clarified that Mrs. Hemingway hasn't consented to any evaluation and considers this meeting an attempt to override her autonomous decision-making. She also provided medical records showing that your mother is in excellent cognitive health. But surely you can still listen to our concerns. I can listen, but I want to be clear about the limitations. Without your mother's participation. This is essentially a family consultation about how to cope with a loved one's choices that you find difficult to accept. They followed Dr. Richardson into his office, a warm space filled with books and soft lighting that somehow made the fluorescent brightness of David's desperation more obvious. Tell me about your concerns, Dr. Richardson said, settling behind his desk with the patient attention of someone who'd heard every variety of family dysfunction. David opened his folder and began reading from his prepared notes. 3 weeks ago, my mother announced that she was selling our family home and moving to a retirement community. This decision was sudden, without family consultation, and appears to be based on emotional rather than rational factors. What kinds of emotional factors? She claims we don't appreciate her, that family dinners have become obligations rather than celebrations, that she feels invisible in her own home. And are these claims accurate? Well, I mean, everyone's busy. We all have careers, families, obligations. So, her perceptions about feeling unappreciated may be accurate. That's not the point. The point is that she's making a major life decision based on hurt feelings rather than practical considerations. Mr. Hemingway, can you help me understand why your mother's emotional well-being shouldn't be a primary factor in her decisions about where to live? Linda spoke for the first time since entering the office. Dr. Richardson, I think what my brother is really concerned about is that Mom's decision affects his business plans. He was counting on using the house as collateral for investments. David wore on his sister. Linda, it's true, isn't it? You built your expansion strategy around inheriting Mom's house. And now that she's choosing her own life instead of subsidizing your business, you're trying to have her declared incompetent. Dr. Richardson observed the sibling conflict with the clinical interest of someone diagnosing family dynamics. Miss Rodriguez, what's your perspective on your mother's decision? I think she's been lonely and unappreciated for years. And I think she's finally brave enough to choose happiness over obligation. I also think my brother and I have been treating her like she exists to serve our needs, rather than as a person with her own dreams. And you, Mr. Hemingway, can you see any validity in your mother's perspective? David stared at his hands, seeing his carefully constructed arguments crumble under professional scrutiny. She's always been there for us. The house has been the center of family traditions. I assumed she'd want to preserve that. Did you ask her what she wanted? Not exactly. I mean, she's our mother. Her job is to take care of the family. Mr. Hemingway, your mother is 68 years old. At what point does her job shift from taking care of others to taking care of herself? The question hung in the air like a challenge David couldn't answer. Dr. Richardson leaned forward. From what you've described, your mother is making a rational decision about her living situation based on accurate assessments of her emotional needs and family dynamics. The fact that her decision doesn't serve your financial interests doesn't constitute diminished capacity. But the timing suggests that your mother has found the courage to prioritize her own well-being. That's emotional growth, not cognitive decline. David felt his last hope slipping away. So there's nothing that would support a competency challenge. No. But Mr. Hemingway, may I offer some perspective as someone who's worked with families facing similar transitions? David nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't eager for more uncomfortable insights. Your mother is giving you a gift. She's showing you that love doesn't require sacrificing yourself for other people's convenience. She's modeling autonomy and self-respect for her grandchildren. And she's offering you the opportunity to rebuild your relationship with her based on genuine connection rather than financial dependency. I don't know how to do that. Start by asking her what she wants instead of telling her what she should want. Oh, Tyler. I also told him that I'm proud of you for choosing your own life and that if he can't respect that choice, he doesn't deserve to be part of whatever life you build. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood settle into its Friday evening rhythms. Tomorrow, Cassandra would need to decide whether to accept the Hendersons' offer. Monday, she would either begin the process of transferring ownership or continue the uncertainty of waiting for another buyer. Tyler, whatever happens between your father and me, I need you to know that my decisions aren't about punishing anyone. They're about finally choosing to live instead of just maintaining. I know. And Grandma, Dad knows, too. Deep down, he's just scared because he built his whole life on assumptions about what he owed him. James' truck pulled into the driveway and he emerged carrying takeout bags and wearing the expression of someone prepared for difficult conversations. Family crisis management dinner, he announced, settling on the porch steps with them. Thy food and moral support. How did you know I'd need both? Pat called. She said David's intervention attempt imploded spectacularly and you might need backup tonight. They moved inside, spreading takeout containers across the kitchen table like a feast of solidarity. As they ate pad pie and green curry, Tyler described the aftermath of David's failed meeting with Dr. Richardson while James shared updates from Linda, who'd apparently spent the afternoon calling relatives to apologize for the family drama. Linda wants to visit you tomorrow. Just her without the kids or McGill. She says she has some things to apologize for and some questions to ask about how to be a better daughter. That would be wonderful. And Cassandra considered the question. David is facing the consequences of building his life on assumptions about other people's choices. That's painful, but it's also necessary. Tyler looked up from his spring rolls. Grandma, are you going to accept the offer on the house? I think so. The Hendersons seem like people who will love this place the way it deserves to be loved. And you're not scared anymore? Cassandra looked around her kitchen, seeing it through the lens of imminent departure. Soon other people would cook their meals here, share their daily struggles and celebrations in these rooms where she raised 3 children and mourned one husband. I'm terrified, she said honestly. But I'm also excited. For the first time in 5 years, I'm making choices based on what I want rather than what other people need from me. James raised his beer bottle to choosing growth over maintenance. Tyler lifted his water blast to Grandma being brave enough to live her own life. Cassandra raised her teacup to family relationships based on love rather than obligation. Outside, the neighborhood continued its Friday evening routines, children playing in yards, families gathering for dinner, the distant sound of a high school football game. Soon, these wouldn't be her evening sounds. These wouldn't be her neighborhood rhythms. But tonight, sitting with the 2 family members who understood that love meant supporting someone's choices rather than controlling them, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had finally found her voice and intended to use it. 6 months later, Cassandra Hemingway stood in her new apartment at Sunset Gardens, arranging art supplies on the built-in desk that faced east toward the mountains. The March morning light streamed through her windows, illuminating watercolor paintings she'd completed in the community art studio. Landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces that seemed to pour from her hands like prayers finally finding their voice. At 69, she moved with the confident grace of someone who discovered that life could begin again at any age. Her silver hair was shorter now, more stylish, and her clothes reflected personal taste rather than the careful neutrality of someone trying not to take up too much space. The apartment was smaller than the Victorian house, but it felt larger somehow, filled with possibility rather than obligation, designed around her preferences rather than family functionality. A knock at the door interrupted her morning routine. Eleanor Patterson from the writing workshop stood in the hallway holding a manila folder and wearing the excited expression of someone with good news. "Cassandra, the community newsletter accepted your essay about immigrant women and artistic identity. They want to feature it in next month's issue." "Really?" Cassandra felt the particular thrill of seeing her thoughts translated into words that others might find meaningful. The writing workshop had become one of her favorite weekly activities. A place where her experiences as an immigrant, wife, mother, and finally autonomous woman were valued as source material rather than background noise. Grace Morrison wanted to know if you'd be interested in reading it at the monthly resident showcase. "She thinks your perspective would resonate with a lot of people here." After Eleanor left, Cassandra sat at a small dining table with coffee in the newspaper, savoring the luxury of reading without interruption. Her phone buzzed with the text from Tyler. "Debate tournament tonight at 7 p.m. if you want to come. I'm arguing the affirmative on universal healthcare policy." She smiled, typing back. "Wouldn't miss it." Dinner afterward. Tyler had become her most frequent visitor, taking the light rail from his mother's house to spend Saturday afternoons exploring the city with his grandmother. They visited art museums, attended concerts, and had long conversations about politics, philosophy, and his college plans. Their relationship had deepened in ways that surprised them both. Freed from the dynamics of family obligation, they discovered they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Her phone rang. Linda calling with her weekly check-in. "Mom, how's the watercolor class going?" "Wonderfully. We're working on a group project about women's experiences across generations. My piece focuses on the intersection of cultural identity and artistic expression." "That sounds amazing. I can't wait to see it." Linda's voice carried a warmth that was missing during the house sale drama. Their relationship had found new equilibrium once Linda stopped treating visits as caregiving obligations and started approaching them as opportunities for genuine connection. She came alone now, usually on Sunday mornings, and they spent time talking about books, family memories, and Linda's own dreams for when her children were older. "How are the kids?" "Good. Sophia's been asking when she can visit your art studio. She's very impressed that her grandmother is becoming a real artist. Tell her any time. The community welcomes visitors, and I think she'd enjoy meeting some of the other residents." "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret selling the house? Miss having your own space?" Cassandra considered the question, looking around her apartment that reflected her tastes, her schedule, her priorities. "I miss the garden sometimes. But Linda, this is my own space. For the first time in my adult life, every choice about how to live is mine alone. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant about choosing your own life." After Linda hung up, Cassandra walked to the community center for her weekly Tai Chi class. The instructor, Chenny, was a retired professor who'd immigrated from China in the 1970s. Their conversations about cultural identity and artistic traditions had evolved into a friendship that reminded Cassandra of what she'd been missing. Intellectual companionship with someone who saw her as interesting rather than useful. The class moved through forms and synchronized meditation. 20 residents finding grace and balance in shared movement. Cassandra had surprised herself by discovering aptitude for Tai Chi, her body remembering rhythms she'd never known she possessed. After class, she joined Grace Morrison and several other residents for coffee in the community cafe. These informal gatherings had become one of her favorite aspects of life at Sunset Gardens. Conversations that ranged from current events to personal history, book recommendations to travel plans. Cassandra Grace mentioned you might be interested in joining the Cultural Exchange Committee. We're organizing a series of presentations about immigrant experiences in America. I'd love to be involved. Wonderful. We're particularly interested in stories about women who reinvented themselves later in life. Your journey from traditional family roles to artistic independence would be perfect. That afternoon, Cassandra returned to her apartment to prepare for Tyler's debate tournament. She'd attended several of his competitions, marveling at his poise and intelligence, proud of the young man he was becoming. Their easy relationship had become a source of healing for both of them. Proof that family connections could be built on mutual respect rather than guilt and obligation. Her phone rang. James calling from his new apartment across town. Hey, Mom. How was your day? Productive. Art class, Tai Chi, planning committee meeting. How was yours? Good. I had coffee with David this morning. Cassandra felt her stomach tighten slightly. David's business had collapsed in spectacular fashion 6 months earlier. His Singapore partners withdrawing when he couldn't provide the promised collateral. The financial ruin had been devastating, but also oddly liberating. Forced to rebuild from scratch, he'd begun therapy and slowly started examining the assumptions that had guided his relationships. How is he? Better, I think. He's working for someone else now, learning to be an employee instead of trying to control everything. And he asked about you. Oh, he wanted to know if you'd be willing to have dinner with him sometime. Nothing dramatic. No agenda. He said he's been learning about boundaries and respect and he wants to try being your son instead of your financial plan. I've been thinking about what you said about finding your voice, about how it's never too late to start speaking up for what you believe in. And I think maybe that's what I want to do with my life. Not necessarily debate, but something where I can advocate for people who don't have enough power to advocate for themselves. Cassandra felt tears building behind her eyes. This young man had somehow learned lessons about justice and autonomy that had taken her 70 years to understand. That sounds like a worthy calling. Will you help me research colleges with good social justice programs? I'd be honored. After Tyler's team won the tournament, they went to a late-night diner near the school, sharing pie and processing the evening's victories. Tyler talked about his college plans, his hopes for making a difference in the world, his gratitude for having a grandmother who'd modeled courage and independence. Grandma, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made different choices earlier? If you'd pursued art school or traveled or built your own life instead of supporting everyone else's dreams? Cassandra considered the question, thinking about the paths not taken, the dreams deferred, the decades of small compromises that had added up to a life she barely recognized as her own. I used to wonder about that. But Tyler, I've learned something important about regret. You can spend your remaining years mourning the life you didn't live, or you can spend them creating the life you still can live. And which are you doing? Creating. Every morning I wake up excited about the day ahead instead of wondering who might need me. I'm taking art classes and writing essays and making friends who see me as interesting rather than useful. I'm building the life I always wanted but never thought I deserved. Tyler grinned. That's pretty amazing for someone who's supposedly too old to change. Who says I'm too old to change? Nobody anymore, but I bet some people thought that when you announced you were selling the house. Some people think a lot of things that turn out to be wrong. They drove back to Sunset Gardens in comfortable silence. The city lights creating patterns against the darkness like stars fallen to earth. As Tyler walked her to her apartment door, Cassandra felt the deep satisfaction of someone who not only found her voice, but was using it to guide the next generation toward their own courage. Grandma, I'm proud of you for selling the house, for moving here, for choosing your own life. You've taught me that it's never too late to be brave. And you've taught me that courage can be inherited even when it skips generations. Inside her apartment, Cassandra made tea and sat at her easel, working on a painting that captured the view from her window. Mountains and sky, light and shadow. The endless possibility of horizons that stretched beyond what the eye could see. Tomorrow would bring art class and book club, a visit from Linda and her children, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on her own terms. At 70, she was finally blooming. And the best part was she was just getting started. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.